Record button has been pressed. Oops, let me get a sip here. Oh, man.
The opinions expressed in the following are those of its participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the producers and the Six Talk Podcast Network. Also, the following contains mature material and mild language, which may not be suitable for all audiences. Discretion is advised.
For Saturday night, January 9th, 2021, this is episode 32 of the Anime Roundtable version 2.0. Once again, a reminder that you can contact us if you have any comments. animeroundtable@gmail.com is our email address. Twitter and Instagram, we're there at Anime Roundtable. animeroundtable.com for show notes and past episodes. And we'll also bring up the Discord and Facebook groups. We're sort of there. And don't forget to leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Whether it's Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, if you can leave some feedback. Oh, and just a note on the Twitter feed. Follow us on Twitter because doing so will almost certainly get a message from us. Akimashite omedetou gozaimasu. Mike Nicolas from the 6 Point Studio here in Toronto. Traditionally, the New Year's greetings in Japanese make references into safely crossing over. Before the New Year, you make wishes for a safe crossover, and after the New Year, you congratulate people for successfully doing so. And that's what we're doing here, especially with how 2020 turned out. With the new year comes new opportunities and maybe some changes too. Hopefully, the changes will be subtle. But once in a while, we have to be a little different. With that in mind, Kevin Ng and Geoff Greig are here this evening. And these two were the only ones available. But also these two are emblematic of how grateful I am that anyone ever paid attention to the roundtable back then. Geoff was a member of the regular live audience of one or two people back during the Comic Den era, and he eventually became a regular on the show. However, this is the first time he's been on since the first episodes of the Six Talk era shows. Kevin was a longtime listener during version 1 and is now a mainstay in version 2. So thanks again for doing this tonight, guys.
You're welcome.
Yeah, of course.
Good to hear from you again, Geoff.
Thank you.
You know, it's been a little while because I think, what was it? The last time you were on was, I think, one of the first episodes of the Six Talk era shows when we were at Anime North a couple years ago.
Yep. I always love those shows, whether it is, jumping onto the mic or coming halfway through because I was at Anime Hell prior, which is what normally happens.
No, normally. And, I on that note, I actually have spoken with Dave Merrill a little bit. Remind me to mention that a little later on, off air, which is once again an encouragement for people to come and see the show live.
I remember when that was something that people could actually do.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Whenever the pandemic ends. No, you guys. Thank you for doing this. Okay. Let me just quickly start by saying it must be noted that both James and Mo are occupied this weekend. And when they told me that, I was thinking we wouldn't have an episode this weekend. But then I thought about Geoff and wanting to catch up and do a Space Heater chat episode with him. But in talking with Geoff, we got to talking about the recent episodes we've done and even the guest spot we did on Zan in Canada with Jesse. And of course, we ended up talking about the last episode with Matt Alt. And I know Kevin has listened to the episode too, so I pulled him in for this episode. I know in time Jeff and I will get to talking about other past episodes, but after our conversation with Matt Alt, I think now would be a good time to start looking back on the special we did with him. Who wants to go first? Any thoughts from either of you? Where do you want to start with that?
Well, I guess that as I mentioned to you off air, I thought that you had mentioned that it was one of your favorite episodes that you've done recently, and I thought it was a pretty very solid, entertaining episode that flowed from topic to topic very naturally. A lot of the topics are things that I'm personally interested from my experience in Japan to his dub support, which as a dub watcher you don't always get.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, lots of topics that very much appeal to me.
I will say just quickly, my in my older age now, no, I've become really patient with dubs. I keep telling the story. I became a fan of certain English voices when I met them before I ever saw
Mm.
any of their work. That's how I explain Lisa Ortiz sometimes. But I think I've grown a even greater patience for dubs now. And these days when I watch anime, whenever I get around to it, if a viable option to watch in English exists, I will at worst alternate between both, which I did with Great Pretender. We'll get to that. We'll talk more about that in a couple seconds. Kevin?
I found it pretty entertaining. I know of Matt Alt through Anime World Order, though I had not heard him talk in quite a long time. So uh, to hear him cover a good number of topics that I was interested in as well was, it was nice. It was really nice. I do think that if we're gonna bring up one point, I don't agree with you guys on the Demon Slayer bit.
Oh, on yokai?
No, just the fact that you don't think Demon Slayer wouldn't be a huge success
Oh,
overseas.
in North America.
By all accounts, it has, I would think. I would say it is on par with My Hero Academia, which I would say is the current Naruto, so to speak.
Okay.
Well, okay, maybe not. Yeah, actually, no, I would. I would say My Hero Academia is Naruto level popularity now. And do I think it'll be like long lasting? That's still on the table, especially because Demon Slayer has ended. But just from what I can tell, by being on different groups and just noticing like people talking about it, I have friends who aren't that into anime that have watched Demon Slayer and they love it. That's obviously just a small sample, but usually something has done pretty well when you have non-anime fans talking about it.
I think that sort of comes to the point that Matt's, well, in a roundabout way, comes back to the point Matt made about the significance of Netflix's algorithm and the motivations for bringing Japanese shows onto Netflix. It's more the mentality that if it's popular, it might work anywhere. I mean, that's a takeaway I got when he gave that line towards the end of the interview.
Is Demon Slayer officially available in English, and which platform is it available on?
They are available on pretty much everywhere. The anime is legally streaming. I believe it was Crunchyroll at the time.
Yes, it's been on Crunchyroll.
I would assume it's on Netflix now, but I don't know.
It's set to be on Netflix, and yes, it's listed on Netflix. Demon Slayer Kimetsu no Yaiba.
Whereas with the manga, it's available through Viz.
Okay.
Actually, what happened back in May or June was that the bi-monthly manga release became monthly because Viz saw the opportunity to capitalize on the demand.
There's your Naruto-ish type
They
mentality.
released a book monthly from I think June to December.
Okay.
Yeah, it's so, and of course you can read Demon Slayer online through the Shonen Jump app as well. It's in the vault now, so you'd have to pay that 279 Canadian a month or $2 US to access that. But it's probably at your local library as well.
Just to clarify, you mentioned Crunchyroll. It is listed on Netflix, but it isn't set to be on Netflix until January 22nd.
Okay.
So
So,
there's that.
so Kevin, I do want to counter your popularity point by just mentioning that Demon Slayer posters are not at Walmart, from my knowledge. And I think that with, if you see Attack on Titan or My Hero Academia, you had posters there within a couple months. And I think that's the true point to tell if something's popular with the normies, I suppose you might want to call it.
Point well taken.
You haven't made it until you can find a Studio Ghibli film at Walmart for a decent price.
I think it's weird because sort of my friend group, sort of generally early 30s, late 20s, none of our sort of circles have seen Demon Slayer, and we're all kind of mystified at this, popular series, especially in Japan, and certainly other, I guess, North American, Canadian fans. Like, it is, cropping up. But I find it weird the sort of status that Demon Slayer is. Like, I'm aware it's super popular, but I personally don't know anyone who's seen it.
That's interesting.
I guess I'll second it. And it's not meant to be a criticism of Demon Slayer. I'm actually, I'm going to try to watch the original anime series myself.
I would say a
So,
lot of its popularity is because of the anime, because the production values on that are very good. It's the same studio as Fate Zero and the Fate Stay Night movies, the good ones, that is.
That's what I do remember. I guess it maybe was 1 or 2 years ago. There was one scene from, I guess, maybe late in the first season of the anime that I do remember started to trend on social media, just for how good it was as far as the animation quality. Some fight scene, I imagine. But that was the last I kind of heard of it, sort of as far as until the movie recently.
as I said, I gotta make time for it. I don't know. It's just, yeah, I guess I'm a little bit surprised myself as to the popularity. I mean, as I said, it
It's
overtook.
It's
Was it?
been a feature because I subscribe to the Gacha Crate
Yes.
sort of loot box. Demon Slayer has been a feature, I'd say, the last 3 crates in a row. So I guess in that way, I kind of was aware that it was something people were interested in.
Well, okay. How often do you get crates?
Theoretically, once a month, but pandemic has slowed things down a bit.
Okay, so generally, not if not, yeah, generally, but not quite right now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I know so little about Demon Slayer, and I guess I want to try and understand it, but I don't want like. Here's my fear: it might sort of be like Attack on Titan for me,
In what sense?
and this is more in a general sense. It couldn't hook me after a few episodes, and
Mm.
I told you my viewing habits sometimes, right? I don't generally go around doing reviews or true recommendations for shows. It's if I can get through a series, a significant portion of the series, if not finish it, then I think it's worth watching, and I will say it's worth watching to people. If I have trouble doing so, then I can't recommend it. And this is to say, I hate to. This is why I have trouble wanting to make too many recommendations or do reviews for this show, because for listeners out there, always get more than one opinion on a show. I personally think it's worth asking around.
Mm-hmm.
So and Attack on Titan, I respect its popularity. It's probably still a very good show. It's just to this point I cannot get past episode 3. I haven't given myself, and it's not necessarily because of content. It's just I haven't given myself the time to.
I would say for Demon Slayer, a lot of its strength lies in the likability of Tanjiro, its main character. His work ethic and his empathy to the people he battles is admirable, and
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that the series does a good job of humanizing some of these villains as well. Now, I do think the pacing of the show is a little slow because the impression I got was that they didn't want to progress too quickly in the storyline. So there are moments where I did feel like it dragged a little bit. And a couple of the supporting cast is annoying.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, Zenitsu is very annoying at the beginning, but I digress. I do feel like it's a pretty quality storyline overall, and remember, this is UFO Table, and it's rare that they put out a terrible show, so I feel like everything kind of melded together,
Mm-hmm.
because I do believe it was largely the anime that made it popular.
Okay.
Your pacing comment is interesting because it made me realize that I think that the shonen filler might be dead.
I would say so for the most part.
Like, I can't think of a single series that has utilized that, and My Hero Academia would be a perfect show for fillers, but they've avoided it.
I think, this is just pure speculation on my part, but with My Hero Academia specifically, I don't think Horikoshi wants there to be filler.
Mm.
And that's also why there was only 2 movies that came out for My Hero Academia. Like, I think it was a conscious decision on his part to not make too many movies in that sense, because those movies would largely be filler. Also, we now see that there's a lot of season breaks now. The only shows that I can think of that just run continuously are Black Clover and Boruto.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Usually they'll do 13 to 26 episodes and then they'll just cut it off. And if it's popular enough, it may get another season, or maybe it won't.
You can end up with something really frustrating like Cardcaptor Sakura Clear Card. I hinted that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the one that, like, sometimes, well, it was just weird. Like, that was just as weird an ending as I've ever seen for an anime series, where that just so blatantly said, read the manga.
Oh God.
That's my takeaway from Cardcaptor to this moment. Okay. Well, I as I said, I want to keep an open mind for a Demon Slayer. I know, like, every time I look on YouTube every so often, I always see a cover of its opening theme song, which is
That song is so
odd.
good.
Which is so odd.
It's probably a topic for another day, but like, I think the boom in the last 5 years of both English and Japanese fan covers has been really interesting to see. Like, it's like, when I was like, getting into anime in the sort of end of high school and into university, finding a good, English fan cover was rare. Every so often a company would actually do an official English dub, but within the last 5 years, there are people who have, I'd say, sustainable YouTube careers just from doing multi-language or their individual language dubs of anime opening and endings.
Good way to put it.
Oh.
I guess it'll depend on how the rights holders feel, and we'll kind of
Yeah
delve into that a bit in the bullet segment, I guess, in the second segment. Okay. Well, what else As I said, this is an open forum for you guys concerning the Mad Alt chat. What else stuck out? What else do you want to? Anything in particular from that chat? Otherwise, this isn't going to be much of an episode. Well,
I thought the video game chat was interesting. Like,
Oh yeah.
in what way? Like,
just the stories of like the different translators and how you went from having fewer than 10 good Japanese to English translators to now you have tons of people saying, yes, when I grow up, I want to translate Japanese video games into English.
yeah, and well, it's sort of a weird thing because like if you read the book, you'll and maybe understand a little bit more about the history of the production on the anime side and how what's the word? What's the phrasing I want to use here? Because I sort of want to be careful. How cheap the industry is, I guess.
Yeah,
Like almost slave labor like the
fair to
industry
say.
can be. And the original sin, which is and anybody who's read the book or knows anything about the history of anime production in Japan sounds redundant to say that anime production in Japan.
Well, it's a complicated story sometimes. There's
Yes.
still situations where things are animated in North or South or even North Korea.
Mhm. Oh yes. Well, when you hear the story, where was I? Well, you'll know that it's it maddens you that the irony is sometimes there could be cases where commentators and writers who write about the industry could end up making more than those in the industry itself. And in the case of translators, and Matt kind of hinted at it in the interview, it's sometimes you get what you pay for. Yeah, I'm willing to do this. I'm willing to do this for free. And sometimes people will jump at it. Sometimes companies will jump at it. But is it a good translation? Does it do it justice?
Yep.
That's the real question, because then that's a good translation is a big part of the quality of a game.
The phrase "you get what you pay for" comes to mind here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the other catch-22 in all of this is any creatives in Japan tend to gravitate more towards the video game industry than anime and manga. Because, and once again, to quote the great urban poets, the Wu-Tang Clan, cash rules everything around me. Get the money, dollar dollar bill y'all. Because that's what it is. It's more practical. It's more, well, it pays better to be in the video game industry. But it's weird because now we talk about localizations, translations into other languages. Then we're going lowest common denominator or cheap buck there.
I did think that, like, with throughout the entire interview, the sort of common thread of localization instead of just translation, I thought was really interesting, and sort of jumping off what Kevin mentioned about the just the video game portion of the interview itself, just the idea of this like level of it's like different levels of localization. I couldn't help but think of Undertale, right? So with Undertale, we have a game that's influenced by a Japanese game that is essentially mocking American culture. So it's this weird, multi-level, and now the developer of that game got to go to Japan to compose music for Pokemon and play Smash Brothers with the director of the series. So like there's, I'm always fascinated by these like different levels of like lenses of how, these people are around the world seeing kind of each other. And I thought that, with what Matt Alt was talking about, the translation of sometimes a translation doesn't have to be good to be popular. So Resident Evil he brought up. I think that you have something like, it's back to the anime realm, Samurai Pizza Cats. I'd be really interested to see what the original directors of that show thought of the English version. A more recent example with the English dub of Sergeant Frog. And then even Power Rangers, right? Where the English adaptation and chimera of weird 30 somethings playing teenagers ended up getting retranslated into Japanese because of the popularity. Um, so, it's great to see all these different layers of both translation and interpretation, and even just really loose adaptation.
Yeah, sometimes it's, well, there's that phrase, picture's worth 1,000 words. We're going to use a bunch of little cliches here, I guess. But it's I guess it's possible to over translate,
Mm.
to go overboard, and then something gets lost because you try too hard. And sometimes if you try and be somewhat simplistic, sometimes you can still be able to get through a lot or convey a lot by not trying too hard. I mean, you know what I mean? I don't know if like and this is coming from somebody who only knows one language, so maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. I fully admit that.
Well, in the interview, I think that relates a little bit to when he mentioned like yokai and sushi.
Oh yes.
Like,
The
because when I was in Japan, people would often say like, "I like raw fish," and they meant sushi. They didn't mean sashimi, or they just liked eating whole raw fish. Because they're trying to figure out translation, and sometimes they'd struggle like, what's the English word for oni? And it's like, kind of demon. And same for things like yokai. It's difficult kind of in on both ends of the translation barrier, I guess.
because if you get too literal, then it really takes away the intent, I suppose. Kind of like umami too.
Hmm.
Umami is another one. And by the way, in watching a NHK World show earlier this week, I think I now know another word that could add to the umami lexicon, or the umami branch of all that. I think the word was koku. I know that's often used as a ancient unit of measurement in Japan of some sort. I think when it relates to rice. But in this context, it was used to describe aromas, I think. I
Hmm.
think. And that's just basically looking it up on Google. But there's more, but obviously it becomes more complex than that. Just like it's more complex to refer to umami as just savory taste. Because that's the best way I can
Yeah.
explain it into English, but it doesn't map out that way as Matt says.
Well, we can thank Food Wars for bringing umami into the English lexicon.
Well, I think you can go even further back than that, actually. Probably even, I think, maybe Iron Chef in its various iterations.
I think
Like,
that everything kind of goes back to that sort of main point that you were talking about, and just a couple seconds ago with money. Like, I think sushi, no matter how you slice it, pun accidental, is more palatable, pun also accidental, than just saying raw fish. Like,
right.
you say, I have this raw fish with vinegar rice restaurant, it's not going to sell as well as this exotic idea of sushi.
Mhm.
Although
So
now it's
something,
very mundane.
right. Well, it's to the point sushi is now part of the regular English usage.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, like with the monetary thing, it was interesting to see you bring up Pokemon, because with the monetization of that series, you can kind of see where the marketing affects the branding, where every generation of Pokemon, the Pikachu clone and the legendary Pokemon keep their Japanese name, even if Hidokage becomes Charmander and Pochama becomes Piplup, but Pachirisu, which is a very Japanese sounding name, stays as Pachirisu in English. Togedemaru
Oh yeah,
stays
that
as
one.
Togedemaru in English, even though I'm sure little 5-year-olds, well, I think it's great that they're learning Japanese pronunciation, but it's going to be more difficult than in some of your other Pokemon, and in the first couple generations when they translated almost everything.
Mm-hmm. Kasumi, Misty. Okay.
I wonder about Plusle and Minun then.
It's so those ones, it's essentially the same, but they're very romanized. Like if you
Ah.
kind of like Eevee, like sometimes in marketing, Eevee is at least used to be spelled like Euvii. Mewtwo used to be spelled out with Myuu TU and then sometimes TWO, so the two was
Hmm.
accurate.
Mm.
Yeah, so the branding has changed even with the romanization of some of these Pokemon that share the English and Japanese name.
Okay.
Hmm. Well, so there's another layer, I guess, we from the interview in terms of video games.
Sorry to gush about the interview again, but um, when he brought up City Pop, I was really entertained because I have just been sort of getting back into City Pop, and it kind of resonated just because mentioning about the video games having that soundtrack. I think my introduction to City Pop was probably Sonic the Hedgehog 2.
Hmm.
We had Dreams Come True providing the soundtrack, which I guess a slightly different genre, but pretty much city pop.
Try and
Um,
explain city pop to me. I mean, I
ooh,
heard the term. I should have listened to a little more over the week since we've done the interview, or a couple weeks now.
City pop is usually slower paced. There are a little bit up tempo city pop tracks, but it's difficult to describe the sound of the music without I guess just without listening to it. I don't know, like I'm not sure how much Kevin, how much do you know about city pop as a genre?
I don't claim to know a lot about it. I do think it has this very distinct
Yeah.
sound that sounds a little retro.
I think
That's just the
maybe
best way I can describe it. I don't claim to know though.
maybe Friday Night from Yakuza is city pop. I'm just trying to look that
Hmm.
up now. But if I'm thinking about a song that I'm assuming you know from your
Recent
Yakuza
listening.
situations, like or Yakuza playing, I think that maybe that would count, but I don't think it's quite right. I think that might just be Japanese disco or whatever. Um,
Because it's, to me, it's a, like as I said, tells you how much I keep up. Sometimes it's a term that I'm only becoming familiar with, right?
It was my
So.
second most listened genre on Spotify for their year-end review,
Um,
and the first one was something called Otacore, which I believe is otaku core, which I believe is what Spotify calls English covers of Japanese songs.
English
huh.
covers of any song.
Yeah,
Great.
and I think video game songs too. So I think if you
Okay.
listen to a bunch of Life Flight from Smash Brothers or Simple and Clean, I think they would wrap that into Otacore as well, but I'm not completely sure.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Well, like I said, as we brought the show back 3 years ago, I sort of became familiar with terms that I'd known the concepts of for years. Annie song is a fairly recent term in compare for me in all my years of keeping up with anime and manga. Right?
I only encountered it when I was in Japan. So 2013. That was my
Mhm.
first time encountering the term.
Yeah. So as I said, it's a fairly recent term. So I would have probably encountered the term maybe a year or so after. And that's because they want to profile it a little bit more on NHK's World's Music shows, which comes back to the Cool Japan initiative, I suppose, or wanting to promote some of that J-pop soft power that we brought up, or that comes up. That's a constant theme recently, right? Okay. Any other takeaways? Oh, I, or do you want to get to like? Otherwise, I can end this and we don't have to talk about the last chapter. Oh, thank God! Oh, thank God!
Why would you say that, Mike?
Now we're going to talk about it because you brought it up.
Yeah, no, it is because you made me reread chapter 9 in Pure Invention, right? And obviously, we're taping on was it January 9th, 3 days after what happened in Washington,
Hmm.
and this is like chapter 9, the final chapter, kind of ties together how boards like Nichanuru, Futaba-chan, um, what is it, 4chan, and the like, and 8kun, how they all tie into the alt right here in North America and the U.S. Like that. That's sort of the impetus of the final chapter of the book. And if you look, as I said, if you Google the terms, the right terms like alt right and anime fandom, you'll actually get some articles about talking about it. And it's sort of you have trouble making sense of it sometimes. How did like Japanese like message boards you end up fueling something like that? Fueling at least the mentality, if not the events of something like Wednesday, right? And in rereading the chapter, it's hard sometimes to put into words, at least from my standpoint, when I reread it. It's a reminder of history, I suppose, because the book was about talking about the lost years or the disenfranchisement of youth, with those feelings that would have existed in the 60s of, you know, not fitting into the society as it was then, if not rebelling against it, being an outcast from it. And then the lost decade being a return version of it, of sorts, for the Japanese youth of that time, and how it's kind of really not figured itself out in the years since. And the how do I put this? Those boards, those boards were a kind of a capture for it, kind of a place for people who were in those shoes to vent, in that position to vent. Kind of a certain degree of aimlessness, and depending on who decided to call to them and grasp it and direct them, it could go a bunch of different ways, right? I mean, as I said, this is really hard to explain right now, but I guess a short story would be anybody on that board is very impressionable because of whatever circumstances they have. Sometimes they're outcasts, sometimes they're just looking for a place to vent, sometimes they're just fans, but then they end up being directed just by in some form, maybe by a well-known force, as was the case with people like Milos, and I can't pronounce his last name, Yiannopoulos. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But he was a well-known alt-right figure like 5 years ago, and then life fell apart for him. Maybe thankfully, who knows? Or Breitbart and Steve Bannon, because they got wind of that and tried to take that and use it to their advantage, and they did rather successfully. Of course, there's other segments who decided to try and use those boards to do good, right? And the boards initially did do good in the Nichanaru era. They did do some good. Sometimes they pulled off some silly pranks, but then it just twisted around when it just kind of twisted around, and like it's one of those Now, to use another popular cliche from another movie, with great power comes great responsibility.
Oh,
No, but because that's sort of what happened there, right? You got a bunch of impressionable people who influence each other. This is sort of how Gamergate kind of started. But then it's like there's so many layers. It's so hard to try to explain it here right now, or explain it in a few minutes, I suppose.
that's what
Right?
happens when you have the anonymity of the internet to hide
Mhm.
your actions. Like you
Like
will sooner or later find these people, and they will come out of the woodwork, and they
it's
will slowly
it's
poison your environment.
it's an amazing double-edged sword. Anonymity is good in one sense; it's horrible in another. We're at a point right now where we need to find where people. It would probably be in the public's best interest to know who was really behind what happened Wednesday. We know in one sense, we don't know in another. I think so, but and it's just strange how you get a bunch of different groups from almost polar opposites be able to claim the same space. I think the and sometimes that's sort of maybe the history of anime and manga too, because in many respects it was born as a form of protest against what was considered the establishment back then. And in the 50s and 60s, it was a very conservative establishment. And to be fair, it's still fairly conservative now in Japan. But here in the US and North America, the mentality tends to be a little bit more liberal, certainly a little bit more left leaning. That's considered the establishment. And the mentality has flipped. The anti establishment is conservative, and they're loud. And they sort of grew that way. So it's just like taking a taking a chunk of that fandom and twisting their minds a little bit, right? It's just weird because yeah, we as an anime fandom would have liked to think that we're all for human rights, right? And we've used iconography to do that. I mean, going back to the video game side, I think Diva from Overwatch is considered a symbol of female empowerment in Asia. And then it just you wonder how it twists to go the other way. The short answer is if you read up on it, it doesn't it you can kind of see how it happens.
Yeah, it's not hard, both, very much on purpose and just little sort of not necessarily accidental, but just, reactions or, uh, I guess, leftovers from, some of these more unsavory elements.
Mhm. I think it's just more of a case of, well, the world is dark. The world has some unsavory elements. And then the virtual world is meant to be a reflection of the real world, whether we like it or not. And this is a case of that dark side, I suppose. So, like, I mean, there's popular phrase. There's just a certain irony because sometimes in our own disenfranchisement, we know people could know the difference between virtual and reality. They just like the virtual. But then the question becomes, well, a lot of the dark side of that reality is in the virtual too. That's sort of some of the story here. And once again, I may have to reread that chapter one more time just to try to make sense of it. And here's another popular cliche: the people behind Nichanuru, 2chan, and 4chan. They're um, like a lot of the people behind that, are trying to kind of put the genie back in the bottle, because they do share more. They do share more human rights views, but there is one more pocket. There is there 8chan or Futap or whatever it's called, 8kun. There is another board,
There will always be
and that
another.
board
Always.
the guy who runs that. That's where it gets interesting, because I think their views tend to be not quite there.
I'm wondering with Donald Trump being banned from Twitter, I wonder how many of this sort of conversation is going to go to places that, you know, the public at large doesn't know about as much.
Yeah, that's, I guess, a fair point, because they're like, yeah, these boards were like a place to nurture that mentality, but did it push it the way it did? It actually drive it in recent times, the way to the point where Wednesday happened? Or was it more driven on like what we call what's more the more modern social medias, like the Twitters, like the Facebooks, or dare I say Parlor? And I mean, I'm still trying to put my like wrap my hand on the whole thing.
I think, as especially as anime and manga fans or fans of Japanese culture, I think it can be a struggle for a lot of us to reconcile with the darker elements of, you know, Japanese history or even Japanese pop culture history, whether that is, you know, going into imperialism or, you know, racism, xenophobia, or, you know, the right wing type of things that are shared between the alt right and I forget what Mr. Alt mentioned. There was like a very Japanese equivalent that was like before the alt right came up in America.
Oh yes, and it's actually brought up in the book, and I have to find the exact term he used for it. Give me 1 second. Go ahead. Go ahead. Continue.
Yeah, like just, you know, with if you look at these far right beliefs, one of the most common and depressing statements, like as a fan of, you know, as a person who's interested in Japan and international relations in general, is when these far right extremists will say things like, "Look at Japan; it's, you know, 98% Japanese purity. Like, you know, therefore, look how strong their culture is. America needs to be like that, and, you know, have a culture that's the same way." And it's like, this is not the best part of Japan.
Yeah, two-channel user Netu Yuko, the net right wins.
Yeah.
I think that's who you're talking about there. I guess part of it is also, as I said, it's part of it's anti-establishment. I think people also were tired of large media, large companies saying what should be, what should and shouldn't be shown, and this was like a way to filter that. Like the boards were means to filter out, so you twist that argument around,
Hmm.
right? So you say you use the gatekeeper. You can use the gatekeeper argument in one sense, but then it gets twisted around to, well, we have to go up against elites, which is a line that the alt right like to use, right? Like gatekeeper, elites. In many, like, are they this? Are they different? Are they the same? So, I mean, I think that was a key point and that was a key point in the actual chapter as well, right? And see, this is and kind of comes back to also our fandom too, as non-Japanese fans of anime, because we went through like the 90s knowing this existed, but we couldn't see it. It was too filtered for us, and we didn't like that as fans. We wanted to see it fairly unadulterated, but keeping once again, then we get it gets complicated again, and we end up with those translation stories as well.
And then, like, at another layer, when I'm thinking back to when the Ghost in the Shell movie came out, and there was this multiple, almost ping pong match of layers of, is this acceptable, this casting, where you had initially like, oh, I can't believe a white actress actor was is playing this Japanese character, and the Japanese character is being turned into another ethnicity. And then you had the Japanese audience saying, I don't care, it's cool, I like this person, or it's a robot, it doesn't matter. And then the tennis racket goes all the way back to the US and saying, no, it's not about that, it's about Asian American actors and how there's so little opportunities for them. And I think that's a really good argument, and that was the game point for that one personally. But there's all these ways where these sort of as not people in Japan, at what point is that a means to gatekeep a conversation? Like, I don't think that just because the original story was written in Japan that Japanese fans should have the be all and end all or the final say in is this okay?
There's part of your translation argument, I guess, right? Great Pretender can be sort of that, because it's set in, even though it's a Japanese production,
Yeah.
it's set in other places. It's set in other places around the world.
And what Matt Alt mentioned about, like, for Doraemon, like, not being able to have Band-Aids on screen. There are certain things that should not be on, or not should not be, but are not, legally allowed on, North American television, and things that really shouldn't be acceptable anywhere in the world, not to mention Japan today.
No, there's a certain degree of weird ironies, I guess, when I reread the chapter again. I mean, we the Gamergate controversy was about, I suppose, was about guys who were worried that women were getting too much into the gaming space. Although the reality is, women have been in the gaming space longer than people will ever give it credit for, especially when it became more of became more fashionable. And I think Alt kind of pins it in the at a point in the Famicom era, in the Nintendo Entertainment System era, and maybe more into the Game Boy era. There was nothing there to regain, because in the formative years, gamers, like in the more formative years, it became pretty equally split. Or the irony of, or maybe, well, that's a Gamergate thing, and that's another story altogether, I suppose. Really, another story when it comes down to it. Or in the irony of censoring genitalia, using pixels and mosaics there, and certain obscene material, but in trying to shelter what would be considered rather normal sexual acts, we ended up, or it had the unintended consequence of fetishizing it. And then you ended up with something like Overfiend. So,
and in a way, censorship is being partly blamed for the PlayStation 5's failure in Japan. So,
okay, that's another. Right, I guess it's a nice little side. How so?
So I forget where it was, but I was reading, I think it was yesterday, that so the PlayStation 5 is I think the slowest selling PlayStation console in history. I'm not sure if they're counting the portables, but those actually were fairly popular in Japan.
Okay.
Yeah, even the PSP Vita, they love those things.
Really?
But yeah.
Yeah.
But with the PlayStation 5, it isn't selling, even with pandemic and everything that's going on. People are starting to notice, oh, this is not looking so good. And one of the points brought up was the fact that a lot of people were upset that the PlayStation 5 was yes, developed in the US, but also there was a lot of censorship happening with games, even on the Japanese end, in order to cater to the censorship laws in North America.
Not the
Certainly
first
not.
time and wouldn't be the last time.
No, it wouldn't be.
I've heard my fair stories with certain games here and there.
Okay. Well, you know what? I shouldn't have been so surprised about the popularity of something like a PSP or Vita, because maybe that's part of that just comes back to the whole commuter culture thing too. People aren't at home enough, so people still like things on the go.
Also,
Yeah.
people liked Monster Hunter.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah, that's about it.
that's probably true. That's probably true.
People in Japan liked
Yeah,
Monster Hunter.
yes.
Oh, more specifically, right?
Yeah, that's a good
Okay.
point.
I do think Monster Hunter World did broaden the audience here, but when it came to the handhelds, yeah, it was predominantly Japan for Monster Hunter.
Okay.
It's fascinating to see some of these games that just won't break that barrier quite as easily. You have things like Monster Hunter, Puzzle and Dragons, Yokai Watch. That all three of them. I think Monster Hunter is probably the most successful. But there are so many of these franchises that really try to break it international, but they are stalwarts of the Japanese sort of video game fandom spaces. Yokai Watch is kind of dead, but Puzzle and Dragon's still there, and Monster Hunter I think is going to be just as ubiquitous as Zelda or Mario.
No. Okay. Did I explain the last chapter well enough, or do we still have, or would we have to talk about this a little more? And trust me, I don't mind talking about it. I'm still trying to make sense of it, and I am sorry that we didn't delve into it in some ways, but I'm also not sorry because I know that that 2 hour conversation could have become 4 in the process. And
then that's even without kind of branching out within from that one topic of talking about these Japanese message boards. You could go off onto so many tangents, but even with just focusing on the boards, I think it could have been a 2 hour conversation.
yes,
Oh
and
yeah.
and for what it's worth, and we'll put a link up in the episodes. There's another YouTube show and podcast called Why Come Japan that also talked with Matt Alt in the last couple months. And my understanding is that particular episode, that particular conversation focused in a lot more on this discussion. We have promised to have Matt on in the future to talk a little bit more about this. But if you really do want to get a good sense of some of his thoughts on the topic at this point, right now, I'll put up a link to Why Come Japan, I think the YouTube version of that episode, just for reference. And I think I haven't given it a full watch, but I know it will be worth a watch and a listen in the near future. So are we done? Are we done with our first thoughts on the interview? Because we've talked about for much of the hour on it.
I guess I
Is there
would
something
also
else you want to bring up?
say I guess I would also say that I did like how conversational it was. And I know that's something that you strive to do when you do these, and it's something that I appreciate because sometimes when you do a formal interview it can sound a little boring, but I guess with this format it just feels more pleasant, and like you've said, you want these to be conversations, so I think that it was a good direction. It was how you took it was the direction you took it in was good, I thought. In spite of the little
It's
tangents here and there.
personally, I was okay with the tangents because figured that would happen. It's And this is probably us as Anime Roundtable, as the podcast, still trying to understand what it's like to have guests. Because throughout all of the now almost 15-year history of this show, minus being away for about more than half of it, we've never had guests. We've never had guests. The
Yeah,
closest we had in the original era was Norm McAvoy coming on to do a segment at Anime North itself, and then Jesse started to come on for the first time, and then we were able to secure a long conversation with Fred Schott, and Fred Schott is really the blueprint for how we do these things. but we want to approach them as partly fans, but we want to engage them on the topics that they write about. So the three guests we've had over the last couple years: Fred Schott, Kat Callahan, Matt Alt. We wanted to have a good understanding of their material and talk to them rather casually about that. And remember, you pair that up with the original intentions, the original inspirations for the show. The show isn't a straight out interview show. It's just a conversation. It's just, maybe to a degree, a debate. Well, it's a round table. So that's inevitable. That should be.
Considering how we went from not being able to get Leanna Kay on the show to where we are
Yeah.
now, I would say the podcast has come a long way.
That's a good, and nobody's gonna, and you know what? How many people will actually remember that? Because I certainly forgot. Look, remember the inspirations for this show. It's ESPN, the sports reporters, which is why I always think so much of the way the late John Saunders handled that show. And Primetime Sports, and of course Bob McCowan. I constantly mention that, but because his approach was always, and he'd do the interviews as well, but his general approach was a conversation at a bar, and a conversation so interesting, so engaging and so casual that anybody listening to it would want to jump in and add their 2 cents and maybe get in on the conversation fully. Which, by the way, comes back to the full circle thought I started with when I introduced you two guys this evening, because you guys were just listeners back then, and now you're fully engaged in the conversation.
And I do think that vibe is, I think you've been able to achieve it. And I think that, even back when you were, operating out of, a university basement or at Anime North, I remember, there were moments when I really wanted to like jump in. At Anime North, I think one of my friends, a vice president of the anime club at York University, I think he even did jump up at the mic one of those episodes because I think
I do remember that.
Yeah.
I remember this too.
Sometimes you do have such like a good and a vibe that sort of lends itself to wanting to do that for sure.
Mm-hmm. So I think we've done okay with it in that sense. And as I said, let's see what we can do with it in 2021 now that, we're still here, which is, I guess, the cool thing. How many people care to listen? What can you do? Okay, but and I'll say this about I'll say this about Matt, and I know I'm going to repeat it, especially in light of talking with Matt. He was just easy to talk to.
Mm.
He is a fan. He is a fan, and he has a certain, he's just a fan. I think he jokingly refers to himself as a man-child, but I think he takes it in stride. But I think that's also the general theory of the book too, right? The kidification of adulthood, I think, is a phrase that you'll hear.
He's definitely a fan.
Mm-hmm.
Having heard him bringing up all these different topics in your episode, as well as the Anime World Order episodes that he's done, because I actually went back to listen to those recently. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's definitely a fan.
Mm-hmm. And you can tell that he's kept his fandom throughout his entire life. He was referencing fandom video games and shows like from the 70s up till the present. So you can you really get a sense that he's immersed in these topics, not only as an academic but also as a fan.
Yeah, and I have a degree of envy for what he's accomplished. Maybe I shouldn't, but although he does envy me on one point, I'm pretty sure. I mentioned I saw Force 5 as it was aired here in
Oh, right.
Toronto all those years ago, and he said, I wish I could have seen that at the time. So I guess I went up, I got him on that one, and maybe the only thing I got him on. So we do have more stories about the Matt Alt conversation, but I think they're also better said when James and Mo come back on. So for sure we'll get the others' thoughts on the Matt Alt episode next time. And as I said, especially with James, because we both have a story about how we planned that conversation. Anyway, we're done, right? We're done with that, right? Oh,
Sure.
is there anything else? Is there anything else, or will we save that for another episode? We've talked for an hour already. Okay, next time.
I can give minor feedback later on.
Oh, cool. And we'll do that off the air. Another reason to come and see the show live. When we get back, we're going to do the bullets. And we're going to talk about a handful of stories that somehow connect with each other on a common theme. That's when we return. It's the Anime Roundtable on the Six Talk Podcast Network.
Do Japanese people have longer intestines than Westerners? Can sexy things give you anime-style nosebleeds? Why are vegetables so insulting in Japanese? If you want to find out the answers to those questions and many others, then I've got a podcast for you. It's called Ichimon Japan. That's ICHIMON Japan. Ichimon means one question, and every episode we ask a question about Japan and dig deep into that topic. So if that sounds interesting to you, check us out at japankyo.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And the podcast now continues for this first episode of 2021. Nicolas, Ing, Greig, continuing the conversation with you in front of a virtual audience. Thanks for listening. Online via the Six Talk Podcast Network, official podcast, Anime North. That was a somewhat heavy first segment, wasn't it?
It got there.
It got there?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, now we're going to lighten it up. Here we go. It's the bullets. Everything presented in point form, but could become a full essay. Where do you want to start? I said earlier that these bullets could, in many respects, tie in with each other, except maybe Stefan Koza. Okay, what do we say? Maybe we should keep this one quick. What do we say about Stefan Koza?
Why, man? Why? Why you got to be like that?
Okay, like I'm looking to just trying to skim the report because we go from alt right to child porn. Great.
Lightening the mood, right?
Yeah, lighten it up. Okay, well, give me the. All right, can you Coles note it? Can you Coles note it, Kevin?
If I have my facts straight, he got caught for possession and distribution of child pornography and is now arrested. And naturally, he is no longer translating anything for Viz anymore. I think that sums it up.
What would he be famous for, if anything?
He translated Jujutsu Kaisen, and he also translated Ghost Girl, which is the new work of Ikeda Sensei, who drew Rosario to Vampire, although he draws that under a pseudonym,
Okay.
among a couple of other things that I can't recall at the moment.
I remember looking up Twitter around the time this started coming out, and Lindsay Loveridge was kind of acknowledging what was going on and how much care they put into doing that, doing the articles based on this. I think.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe he can. Maybe Koza can get a job with Watsuki-san. Look, yeah, there's the horns right there. Okay, well,
You're
there's much
assuming
else.
he's going to
Get back in.
That's assuming that he'll still be alive in 3 years.
Japan is also different than the US when it comes to these sorts of things.
Oh yeah, sort of. Yeah. Obviously, that's another story.
Because the stereotype is that inmates don't take kindly to those kinds of people.
Crimes.
Yeah. But in any case, it was also reported that he was arrested in Japan a few years ago for secret recordings of girls back when he taught at a Japanese school. So
I'm not
Yeah.
sure. I'm not sure if you two know this, but all phones in Japan, you can't turn the sound off the camera because of that very reason. It's such a rampant problem that all Japanese phones, there's no silent mode for the camera functions.
interesting.
Really? So if I put the rocker down, I'm still going to hear the click.
Yeah,
Hit the shutter.
exactly. Yeah, there's nothing you can do. Even if you like connect headphones, it still will come out of the speaker.
And
I can
also,
see.
just to clarify one thing, because people were kind of criticizing Viz for even employing this person. Well,
Mhm.
just so people are aware, he was a contractor, so he was paid his amount for translating however many chapters he did up to that point. He does not collect royalties. So you can feel okay for supporting Jujutsu Kaisen by purchasing the manga.
Support for the original artist.
So yes, I would say do not boycott the manga because of this.
We had this discussion with Act Age in some form, didn't we? Sort of.
Sort of.
Yeah. I forgot the names again. Oh, you know the names. What are the names again? With Act Age?
What Tatsuya Matsuki, I believe it
And
was, and Shiro Usazaki was the artist.
yeah, Ushizaki. There you go. Yeah. I guess it's one of those things again. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yep. Oh, he's in jail, or he will be in jail if not already. So I'd say people don't have to worry about much at this point. I would like to hope.
I would like to hope. Okay. Okay, where do you want to go next? Because there isn't really much else to mention about. There isn't really much else to say about Mr. Koza.
Yeah. Let's see. You brought up that article with Shueisha or something like that.
Okay, Geoff, tell me about this one. This one, because I read some of this. There isn't too much said about it as
Yeah,
far as I can tell.
so a few, yeah, it's interesting. Like the actual event or the reason, I think is still a little bit mysterious. But I think either yesterday morning or maybe the day before, a lot of Twitter users noticed that their display pictures, their header images, GIFs that they were using, were essentially copyright claimed by Shueisha. And it led to mostly humorous jokes about like, well, we'll see if you can copyright this, and let's make as many yaoi pairings as possible, and then if they take it down, it'll prove that it's canon. So you know, people were people were approaching it in good humor, but there was a little bit of an undercurrent of like, oh, why can they just remove fan art? And it obviously led to a lot of discussions of legal right and derivative works kind of stuff. But it was fairly rampant and seemingly random. Some people were completely fine, but others had entire galleries essentially taken down. And it does seem to stem from something that technically started months ago, which is essentially just more cracking down on piracy in general.
Yeah, this is in like we're gonna put up the comicbook.com article based on this, but know that articles have cited a copyright law that was approved back in June and came into effect in the new year. That's part of it. So, like we talked last episode about Kodansha saying, I'm keeping my eye on you, right? And yes, I'm using that. I'm using that gesture. I'm using the pointing my at, the eye. You know what I'm talking about. Yes, I'm using that gesture right now. Like it seems to be just. I think it's the publishers now saying they can do this now
Well,
because of this. Like it just comes with this. It just seems to coincide with the law coming into effect.
yeah. And I think that with the fan art situation, I think that some of that was a bot. From what I saw, one report, it was just one tweet, so I'm not sure how much validity that was there. But it was an automatic bot. It was only meant to target Japan, whether you can argue that's a positive or a negative or just neutral. But apparently it was an error, that it was supposed to be Japanese targeted, but it ended up affecting the rest of the world as well. But I think that with piracy, Japan, this is why, so many things are region locked. Japan is afraid that it'll be easier for Japanese citizens to get a hold of, pirated North American products, which in a lot of times is true, either easier or like more convenient. Like even, Japanese official release Japanese language media is often cheaper if you get it in North America.
Reverse importing, sort of.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Anime is usually a lot cheaper. Well, and it was a problem for hentai anime as well, as we all know.
Yes,
Wow.
well, we've constantly talked about the whole Bible Black thing from way back, right? So, yeah, I found it, the timing just grabs me, I suppose. I mean, on a similar note, just before the new year, the studio currently behind everything Neon Genesis Evangelion came out and asked fans to stop making lewd fan art of its characters. Although there's a weird catch-20, and I get it, it's a weird catch-22 to me because people always stated sometimes that's sort of what kept it going all these years, that people decide to have imaginations of their own when it came to characters.
Having watched the series for the first time with the next Netflix release, I kind of get it. I know there are movies that I haven't seen, but there's definitely a lot of room for, I want to see these children do something other than cry in the as far as
That's good. Yeah, that's sort of it. Now I feel like going back to points that were expressed in the book as well, in Pure Invention, right? The irony is sometimes, like, the rise of segments of fandom was because people were allowed to express, or were generally allowed to express what was on their mind, letting their imaginations run wild. I mean, that's a bit of how the Dojin story went.
And it's reflected in North America too. Like slash fiction is why Star Wars or Star Trek came back. And if you look at Twilight, or what is it, 50 Shades of Grey was originally like weird Twilight fan fiction or something. Like there's it permeates lots of cultures.
Mm-hmm.
But I think with Japan, what's different is that they have entire conventions based on fan fiction, which
Komika,
doesn't
Well,
really
yeah, exactly.
exist.
Komikia, yeah.
But the weird part about the story, when you think about Comicut's history, is it kind of gave birth, nurtured a lot of the female fandom that would eventually become so important decades later. So, I mean, and in some ways, that's sort of. I was about to say, isn't that sort of how Eva's popularity kind of maintained itself these last couple decades? But then again, you can sort of use that argument with a lot of titles, couldn't you?
Well, the
Yeah.
show was good
Well, yeah, that too.
and memorable.
That aside, that aside, right?
But we cannot deny that the copious amounts of Rey and Asuka merchandise has sustained this fandom and its creators for the past 20 years. And to my knowledge, it seems like Kara is just, they're putting up guidelines, but whether or not they would really go after people is hard to say. And naturally, this went up because the last movie is coming out soon. About fucking time.
I'll be honest, I have not seen the movies, but I presume they're a pretty good watch.
And
They're worth a watch.
I've only seen the Netflix dub, unless you want to count me watching years ago Rosathon, which is referred to as Budget Evangelion.
That is not fair.
That is not fair, dude. That is not fair.
Rosathon is the best Eva clone of the bunch.
I don't even.
Brain Powered, on the other hand.
I think
that's a fair, unfair comparison. Unfair anyway. I think it's just.
So I
really like Rosathon.
I like Rosathon. I might have liked Rosathon better in some ways. I mean, some of that is, I came to Evangelion fairly late, but I thought that Rosathon's "oh no, this is what's actually happening" episode was better than Evangelion's version of it. But I saw Evangelion after, so I'm not sure how much of that.
That's great.
I'll confess, I have watched the 3 movies, like the 3 remake films, to be specific. I did not watch past episode 5 of the Evangelion TV series.
Oh, wow.
So that also skews my judgment a little bit, because I did watch Rosathon in full on G4 Tech TV up in Canada.
Way to go. Coming soon.
Oh wait, no.
Coming back soon.
It was not on G4 Tech TV, but it was on the on-demand service.
Oh yeah, okay. The
Rogers. Then G4 made it available through there.
Okay.
I liked Rosathon. The Rosathon movie was a joke, though. It was an editing nightmare.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. The movie is not very good.
Well, see, do we have anything else to add to this story?
So yes, actually.
Okay, go ahead, because I'll have another thought, sort of related to. But
so
go ahead, Kevin.
The rumor is that yes, Kara may not necessarily prosecute people on this, and they're just using it as a way to try and make the image a little squeaky clean, at least for the duration of when the movie's out. The other true tragedy of this is that Mogudon, who is artist famous for drawing Rei Ayanami hentai doujinshi, has said that they will no longer draw Rei in this light anymore, and I can only imagine the hearts of many of those fans.
Oh, the fandom
breaking into little pieces.
I mean, I kind of get it, but these are like high school students, right? Like, I don't remember the series that much. It was a few months ago.
Well, he
I know that
doesn't draw them like high school students, that's for sure.
Oh boy.
And that's
Mogudon's work, yeah.
That's the constant dojin legal gray area problematic situation, I guess.
Ray looks like she's like 19 with that body.
Okay, another story altogether. I mean, to me, it's like the studio. What's the name of the studio again? Because it's not like what's the name of the studio now?
Studio Kara now, because Hideaki Anno took the rights with him when he left Gainax.
When he left Gainax. It's like Studio Kara doing their best version of Kodansha. I got my eye on you. I got my eye on you. And yes, I'm doing the pointing at eyes gesture again. That's sort of what. I guess that's just me. Although, coming back to like you just watched the dub, right? You just watched the dub on Netflix, right, Geoff?
That is correct. Well, not
And-
just, but like around when the time it came out. So I guess it would have been
we're
about
talking
6
about 2
months
years.
ago.
Well, it's
Okay.
been like the original TV series.
Like
Further back.
the original Netflix dub. I guess that would have been a year ago now.
I think it was in 2019.
Yeah.
And remember at the time, people were up in arms over the translation of one line,
Yeah. Yep.
right? And we thought it wasn't fair at the time. And then when we talked with Matt, and that whole bit about translation, frankly, I doubled those words I said back then. I doubled down. That wasn't fair. I thought that it wasn't fair at the time, and then the way Matt put it, I doubled down on those feelings, and I felt bad for Dan Kanematsu at the time because he was being dragged through the mud over that.
Yeah, I felt bad for Dan as well.
And like the way Matt talks about his experience in translation, yeah.
There are so many nuances to the translation and localization process. And with, the infamous line in question, in watching, again, watching the series for the first time in English, I think that if they used what fan subbers have used in the past and then tried to translate it into spoken English, I don't think it would have come across as romantic as the word like in that context. Because I think as teenagers, the word like implies romance, and as a weird, creepy angel being, the word love has more of a, cosmic sensibility. And as, we learn in the series that he is this,
the last angel.
Yeah, exactly. I think love coming from a mythological creature is not as powerful. So I think like kind of, he's in a teenage body form. This might just be me justifying it. But, from my perspective, as, with both of those contexts, I think it was the right choice to imply romance, but I definitely get why people didn't like it, but agreeing with you, no one should have been dragged like he was for that edit or that interpretation rather.
When you and this is not quite related, Geoff, but when you went through that explanation, I was thinking about this meme. This meme that says, a bite mark, like, and it shows somebody's neck or something. A bite mark is a sign of affection, saying somebody loves you. And then it's put beside a picture of a lion eating a zebra with the words, "I love you, zebra." That's what I think. That's what I was thinking when you went into all that. Same, I guess, almost the same way.
And there's in a lot of ways there's no real way to tell, like unless you actually ask the writer of the series.
And for all we know, the writer may have spoken specifically.
Yeah.
Sorry, I cut you off.
No. I was just gonna basically agree with you there.
Right, because as I said, go back to talking with Matt Holt. Something could happen there. Not to say it did. We'll never know. But it's just worth thinking about. Because you weren't there. It's sort of like Star Wars to me sometimes, and how George Lucas went in to change it a couple times over, the original trilogy. People were up in arms, but this is George Lucas's own property. It's his art, and maybe there's something he wanted to change. That's his right. It's his property.
Yep.
But
We don't have to like it, but
it's interesting. We don't have to like it, but then there's also like a movement of sort of rejecting the canon, right? Like people don't agree with that. I think you're going to find it way more with Harry Potter compared to Star Wars, um, just because of how, I guess, personal and emotional kind of the weirdness of the author is in that case.
these days, yes.
Yeah. Um,
And
yeah. Go
go
on.
ahead, finish your thought.
Oh, just like, and I think that the idea of fan work is going to be interesting. I'm going to be interested to see how that develops, because with Star Wars, the most popular one in recent years had nothing to do with George Lucas. Like Mandalorian, I don't know if George Lucas even saw it before the public did. Probably not.
Probably not. I mean, he didn't have much to do with the last 3 films, did he?
No.
And I guess to some degree we can sort of say that about Game of Thrones too, in its own way.
Yeah.
Like another version of it, I suppose, because people are so upset with how that ended. I've never watched it. I keep mentioning that, even though I have like a good chunk of the series actually legally through iTunes.
I only watched it to prove to another friend how easily I could find it illegally online.
And
I
you
ended up
did
watching
great.
9 minutes while eating dinner and then didn't watch another minute of that show.
I'm just thinking to myself, eat dinner while watching the Red Wedding.
Yeah, I think I'd be fine.
I think so too.
I don't get phased by that kind of stuff while I eat.
Well, the thing is now everybody knows about it. That's the other part.
Mm-hmm.
It's hilarious.
It's
Like
like
as I said, the reactions to the episode were viral. I remember that much.
It's like the Western TV show equivalent of Final Fantasy VII, where dies, or the anime, or of Cowboy Bebop, where dies.
I do find it
just in case people actually don't know.
when Sephiroth was announced for Smash Brothers, they had that interview slash overview with the director Masahiro Sakurai, and he just basically talked about the spoiler just verbatim, and then afterwards like, oh, oops, I guess that was a spoiler, but the game's 20 years old, who cares? And then he just moved on casually.
That's sort of one way to put it, really.
I've never played the game, but I knew the spoiler when I was, in grade 5, just because
for God's sakes, in Japan they put it in the commercial. I can tell you it was in the commercial.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Like I remember seeing it in one commercial. That's
I'm just imagining like a Star Wars trailer with like, and his father, Darth Vader, will happen.
That's sort of it too.
Oh.
Well, I mean, that's a funny part because that's how we end up going into the prequel trilogy, right? We know what Anakin would eventually become, and they kind of tease you with it in some of the ads. I remember one of the original posters I saw advertising the first movie. I think it was Phantom Menace. It's of the little boy Anakin, and then you see a shadow, and that shadow is of Darth Vader, like coming from the young Anakin, and that's the whole idea of that trilogy, how he became Darth Vader. At least I think it is.
I think they should do that that specific type of thing with all famous like movie villains. Like I think you should see like
an origin story.
Yeah, but they're doing something that's like really silly, kind of like pod racing, like seeing like Freddy's history as, a go-kart, champion, or, bowling. Like just really, really devaluing the evil so that they can make yet more movies to show the transition into evil.
Once again, to quote the great urban poets, the Wu-Tang Clan, cash rules everything around me, get the money, dollar, dollar bill, yeah. And Yakuza's kind of like that too. They gave an origin story with Yakuza 0.
Oh, and just to quickly follow up on the Evangelion thing, because I was scrolling through some of the comments on ANN just now.
Mhm.
The guidelines that were posted were technically done in anticipation of an art contest, but the document did not limit itself to only that art contest. And apparently there was clarification from Kara that they wouldn't necessarily be cracking down on the community, but they did say that if artists continue to draw characters from Evangelion outside of those guidelines, that they are doing so at their own risk.
Okay. Well, I guess it's a protection of the sanctity, I suppose.
And I think that like when you're looking at something like Comiket, although the profits are very low, I think it's pretty amazing of a relatively famous Japanese company to permit it at all. Like if you look at how much Disney has cracked down at North American conventions, like you can't draw and sell pictures of Spider-Man anymore as much as J. Jonah Jameson wants them. Like there's Disney has been really strict.
Sure. We had. I think there were situations of that during Kingdom Hearts'
Oh
rise
yeah.
in popularity. You can only
Mhm.
draw. You can only draw Sora.
And like it's interesting because like I think it's very frustrating when a large company like Disney does something like that, but with smaller people I don't have as much of a problem. Like I know at Anime North, from what I've heard, there were like a few series that like you weren't allowed to sell fan art of, and it was all the Disney series, and then a few smaller things like Undertale, and I think maybe what's that popular one that was annoying for a while? The Gremlin people.
I'm at a loss
I'm
to
at a
The
loss
give you.
gray.
too.
They were gray. It was started as MS Paint chat. I'm Homestuck. Okay, there we
Oh, that one.
go. But like, yeah, like there were a few smaller series that said, please don't sell fan art. And I kind of get it there since, they kind of make money through their own art of their own thing. But I just find the legalities behind fan works in general very fascinating.
Sometimes problematic.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, as I said earlier in the episode, it's rough sometimes when maybe a commentator of an industry can end up making more than an actual creator in the industry, as maybe could be the case in terms of anime. But all this stuff kind of gives me pause for thought as we move forward with this podcast. I mean, if you've listened to the episodes, sometimes some of the stuff we use could be of questionable usage, I suppose. I guess that's part of the New Year's resolutions. Okay, that's pretty much it for the bullets, at least the ones we intended. Okay, I guess before we go this evening, I did have a little thought. There was a part of me that when we wanted to do a second segment, I wanted to put up a thought and I want to ask around the table if they think it would happen or it would be a good idea. So I have two to start this time around. I'm going to put them to you guys, and they're somewhat thought provoking, and then they're somewhat topical. And you tell me if it's plausible. So let's go with the obvious one, or let's go with a philosophical one, and then I'll go with the more topical one. Care to play along?
Sure thing.
Of course.
Okay. Okay. With all these comic books, like Marvel, like the MCU, like DC, the DC universe, tell me about the plausibility and the feasibility of something like a Jump cinematic universe.
Ooh.
Like I mean, let's face it, the Jump as an imprint has like all those brands, all those titles, all that history. Could you make a cinematic universe out of it, considering a lot of the titles within it?
I wouldn't say it's out of the realm of possibility, but
And
I
would it
just,
be even a better idea, a good idea?
but I just can't picture it happening.
I think the recent video game proved that it wouldn't be a good idea. It was pretty panned, and just the trailers were super weird, and all the video footage I saw was weird because you just had the player's original character walking around, and Luffy's in an abandoned, New York or generic city that's super dark and gringy, and then Frieza shows up. It just kind of seemed weird. I think the more generic fighting game a few years ago on I think maybe PSP or Vita did better, but it was trying less.
Which game
Um,
are we talking about again? Just so we got the title right.
Jump Force, yeah,
Jump Force?
Yeah.
Okay.
But what I'm curious, do you mean like a live action movie universe, or do you mean like just like a crossover animated movie?
See, the crossover animated movie wouldn't.
I
I'm
think
not
we
totally sure. No, I'm thinking live action because the
No,
funny.
that live action movie would require way too much money.
Well, the other side,
It would do.
the other side is I guess because fandom feels that any attempt at live action is such a train wreck too. I've always stated I take fascination in just about any interpretation because it gives another creative force a chance to express what they thought mattered to them in an original work.
I think live action adaptation should go further with that adaptation element of it, though, because I'm not sure if ever on the podcast you covered the Netflix Death Note, but I think the main problem with Netflix Death Note is that it tried to adapt too much of the Shonen Jump Death Note.
Mm.
I think they should have just taken the concept of Death Notes exist. Let's see what would happen in the USA instead of trying to really cram these characters into American bodies when they could have just made completely original characters.
That's an interesting. That would at least be a. I get the feeling you'd have trouble selling that to at
Yeah,
least most
that's
fans.
the problem.
That all said, it's another angle. I mean, I never saw Death Note, any form of Death Note. I mean, as I said, for me it was Bleach,
Hmm.
the live action Bleach, which I found at least palatable.
I think Death Note could have worked. It's just that the execution wasn't as good.
Mm-hmm.
Now, yeah, Western live action adaptations of animated properties from Japan are not good. There's maybe only 2 or 3 good ones on that front. Live action Japanese adaptations have a better batting average, but also not too great.
I've heard very sad things about the Mob Psycho 100 live action.
I didn't even know
Mm-hmm.
that existed until you mentioned it just now. Wow.
So, so maybe going back to my original premise, maybe it depends who. Maybe it may only remotely be interesting, depending on who does it.
And I've made this point before, but I do, as much as I like accurate adaptations, I am always okay with adaptations that diverge from the original source material, as Geoff stated. So, one example of this was the first live action Attack on Titan movie.
Hmm.
I thought that was a good adaptation in the sense that it felt more like a horror movie.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think with that one, I haven't seen it, but from the impression I got, they kind of grounded it more in reality, right? Like the Attack on Titan original series is very much like Full Metal Alchemist in like an alternate Earth-like setting, but I got the impression that the movie was a little bit more Earth.
The first
Hmm.
half you could make that point. The second movie, not so much.
Okay.
Okay.
I still think the second movie is okay, but I think the tone of that second movie changes from the first one, and I didn't think it was a good change. I still like that they tried something different, don't get me wrong, but I do think that first movie was better.
And I think that's a really good point about this adaptation of, say, a Jump universe, is that I don't know if either the US or Japan would be able to create that balance that they have with the Marvel universes. Like even with if you look at, DC as well, like both, they're not one-to-one adaptations of the comics, like far from it in some cases. In other cases things are fairly close. And I'm not sure if a lot of these manga series would be able to handle that stress of conversion.
You would need somebody high up on the staff list that knows those properties well, because I think one of the reasons why Battle Angel Alita was a good live action adaptation was because James Cameron
Mm.
likes Alita,
He was a fan, certainly.
and they had
Loved
a
it.
lot of time on their
Yes,
hands.
that too. Well, yeah, Avatar kind of pushed it back a decade, I think.
And I think you'd also have to be selective about which series you chose. Like
Yes.
a series like One Piece or Dragon Ball are very fictional. They're not set in Japan, really, or even Earth. But if you had something like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and Assassination Classroom, because both of these series take place on Earth but are supernatural, I think that could lend itself to crossover a little bit easier. If in
Mhm.
this sort of imaginary cinematic universe thing, like you can always have a dimensional rift show up, but
Hey,
that's
Spider-Man's playing with it now, I
yeah.
think. Okay. All right, so there's one. Let's go to the other one. This one's a little bit more pressing, and I think a little bit more closer to us. Will Anime North happen this year, even with the rescheduling?
I'm gonna say no.
If we're looking at 2021, I believe Anime North will have a physical presence in 2021. I don't know if there will be a convention.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay,
I
as
I,
in,
I think there's a greater. I mean, I think that they're going to do everything they can to have their convention in July. I think it might be more likely that they do a little Halloween party at the JCCC like they have in the past.
That would be
okay.
more realistic, I would think.
It's just a guess though. Like I really I think it
Yeah, we're all guessing.
I think it's pretty 50-50 right now.
I think 50-50 is the best case scenario. And we said this back then when we talked about it more at length. I applaud them for hedging. I applaud them for doing this, for going for the backup plan.
Well, they have
And,
to.
and I know, I mean, and the way they're doing this, the way they're talking about it, I really respect that. And I respect their candor about it, especially acknowledging it still may not happen. And I don't think it will. I'm really skeptical. And this ties into, well, let's give the COVID update right now. And maybe the short version of the COVID update is
Uh-oh.
for Ontario, it sucks and swallows.
Hmm.
We daily case counts over the past 2 weeks have easily gotten over 3,000. I forgot exactly when we broke that barrier. It doesn't matter. I think we did get to, like, we are straddling more the 3.5 mark, and with it the hospital admissions and ICU usage is goes without saying. And the testing rates and the positivity rates in relation, the ratio is up. I think it's at, if memory serves me right, it was like at 8% yesterday. So we're not in an easy spot. The pandemic series of this podcast is going to go for some time, I think.
I made a social distance drop off delivery on Christmas Day to a friend's house,
Mhm.
and it was almost impossible to find parking. People did not
Oh,
take people did not, and this was street parking. This wasn't, oh, at one building there wasn't a spot in the visitors lot. This was just a suburb in the Scarborough North York border along a road which normally
We're
has.
talking northeast end.
Yeah, exactly. Um, it was difficult to find a spot, and all the suburb roads that I kind of drove by, it was the same situation. I People did not treat the please do not have big family gatherings seriously at all. I appreciate that they included the the exceptions for people like me who are single and live alone. But I
mhm.
didn't really take advantage. Like I talked to people 6 feet away. And
That's commendable.
that was me
Mhm.
kind of stretching that, is I had that, and I had one other meeting with a single person in the last week or so. But in general, people are just behind closed doors acting like everything is normal.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
we've all had our lapses, I suppose.
And
But
and I think that that's understandable. But I think it's just that people aren't treating things seriously, as far as even these lapses. Like it should be a conscious, like, mental battle when you're making these concessions. It shouldn't be, I'm just going to live my life as normally as possible, even though everything, consumer based is closed. It should be, is my mental health at risk if I don't talk to someone? Okay, yes, I guess I'll go for a walk with someone. It shouldn't be, I'm just going to have parties um, with
I know we're talking
people.
both extremes, I suppose.
Yeah.
But
Mm.
obviously, I know where you're going with that. I can respect where what you're trying to say there. But I don't know. Well, as I said, just going back on it, on the whole thing, like going back to Anime North, and
Ah.
that's probably why.
That's what I'd like to do.
And that's why I say I don't think it will happen
Mhm.
because I don't trust society, our society, to stick to the rules, so to speak. And I don't, I can see why. I understand why. You can only keep people locked up for so long, but it's just that people have accepted that this is the new normal. And, well, if I need to do this one thing or these two things, then those are the risks I'm going to take.
Yeah,
Or maybe they don't even think that and they're belligerent, like Geoff said.
that's possible too. All you really need to know now, at least the thing I want people to know now is 4K is coming this week. Hang in there, folks. Hang in there.
It is really sad. Like, I don't know if I've mentioned this ever on the podcast before, but Anime North is my Christmas. It means more to me than Christmas probably does at this point. I was devastated. An AN staff member phoned me right before or right as they made the announcement last year because he wanted me to to hear it from a friend.
Mm,
Um, I it's a very emotional and celebrated moment for me. Even a bad AN is just kind of like, oh well, it was kind of a bad, cool, awesome event. But if it's if we're still at multi-thousand a day, like I can understand if it doesn't run, like it's, or even if there's a risk that it will be at that level. It's easy to be pessimistic as far as will it run, but yeah, I guess we will see very
Okay.
shortly.
Yep. Anyway, that's, I think, on that somber note. Okay, okay. I guess now I'll lighten it up at the very end. What's on your streaming queue right now, Geoff,
Um, right
or reading
now,
queue?
yeah, right now, nothing on the reading queue. Right now, I'm still very much in anticipation of April's Shaman King reboot release. Um, I am anticipating the new seasons of Beastars and Doctor Stone, but I watched both of those dubbed, and the dub releases are still shrouded in mystery.
Uh-huh.
So,
oh, in what sense?
oh, I haven't been able to figure out when the release
Oh,
is,
okay.
because like with like My Hero Academia, it's usually simul dub for the first 6 weeks or so. But Beastar's last time for the first season, it was I think 2 months delay, and then for Doctor Stone, I think it was about 3 weeks delay. So I should have new anime to watch shortly when it comes to at least Beastars and Doctor Stone. But I'm just going to be dreaming about Shaman King for 3 months, 4 months, I
Oh
guess.
boy.
I might watch it too. Might. I'm been
Might.
very bad at watching anime lately.
Okay. Well, okay. One thing you want to mention on your read or watch right now, Kevin?
Well, I am very slowly watching Gundam Build Fighters only
Ooh.
because I have a friend who willingly asks me every week, "Hey, are we watching Gundam Build Fighters this week?" And he's already watched the show. He's just willing to watch it with me, and he's willing to watch it again for the social experience. So I've actually made slow but steady progress on that front. Uh,
Okay.
as for manga, I'm set to finish reading part 3 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure through the
Mm,
library, and I also have another 3 volumes of Demon Slayer that I have to read.
There you go.
And I have to say, things escalated very quickly from where I am right now.
Just quickly, the copies of Demon Slayer, are they your copies or library copies?
They are also the library's copies.
Okay.
Uh,
See,
which means I don't read any of my own stuff yet again.
well, that's fine. That's always there. Look, see, in terms of my reading and watching, I'm still trying to finish podcasting for dummies and failing miserably, which means I probably should have to start it over or take another course, or take another podcasting course. The watching list is a little more interesting because I started to watch the first season of Shinya Shokodo. Netflix has the original 3 seasons now of Midnight Diner. We mentioned that in past episodes, and I actually started watching them. And I will tell you, they are quite different from the Netflix seasons, the final 2 seasons that Netflix produced. So you can, so I look forward to seeing how it evolves. The stories are even more depressing, if that's possible, for starters. And I think the upshot, and I guess to listeners, and this isn't really meant to be a spoiler, but the master in Midnight Diner, who never really got involved too much in the stories in the last 2 Netflix seasons, in the first couple episodes, he kind of gets a little bit more involved in the stories. So they, in the process, they end up being a little bit more intense as well in comparison. But it's a good watch, and it still holds overall the same tone. So I mean, it's a no brainer for fans of the original series, or of the Netflix series. This is the original. These are the original episodes, but it's a no brainer to watch regardless. So I'm enjoying that. The funny regret, and this is probably me throwing myself under the bus. One thing I did want to watch was Crazy Rich Asians. It was on Netflix, and I meant to try and finish it. I only got about halfway through it, but then I got sidetracked because it was on Wednesday, and well, lots of stuff happened Wednesday. Upshot is it expired on Netflix before I could finish it, so now I wouldn't mind trying to find another means to finish watching the movie.
I'm sure the library has a copy of the Blu-ray for you to rent and borrow.
Oh, I'm sure I'll have many options if I just dig around, even if I just ask friends and family to borrow a disc. But that's and then the last thing is Great Pretender, and I know we can talk Great Pretender in terms of the translation stuff because that's a good reference point from the Mad Alt conversation. I haven't started the final 7 episodes of that yet, so but I look forward to it eventually. And that's my cue, and we'll see where we all are next time, right? Anyway, that's pretty much it for this episode. Geoff, great that you did this.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm sure well, first of all, you want to do the Space Heater chat with me in the near future, like, because we really do got to catch up and see. And I don't think many of the listeners knew that you did take the JET program. So we can talk at length about that when you do the Space Heater chat with me. Okay.
Great.
And I know we can talk about a whole bunch of other stuff. So, and of course, you're back in the rotation. So hopefully you'll be on the show again a little bit more in 2021. Kevin, I'll see you in a couple weeks, right?
Yep. Oh, there's a slam dunk movie that they announced recently. Oh, yeah. We just saw this now. Oh, man.
Well, we can talk about. We'll put up the link for that, and then maybe we can talk about it a little more.
But Toei's involved, which is not always the best thing. But we'll see.
Hey, Toei animated those intros to Sonic CD, which are feats of animation. No sarcasm there. I actually think so. I just want to call out Mo. If you're listening and you haven't finished Japan Sinks, why haven't you finished Japan Sinks? It's great.
I'm sure he'll hear the message.
Okay.
And of course, we'll have James on in the very near future as well. Once again, that's pretty much it for this episode. If you've been listening and like what you heard or have something to say, well, say it. Contact information is in the show notes and, of course, at the beginning of this episode.
Leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts.
Or wherever you get your stuff. Until next time, thanks for listening. Join us again for another edition of the Anime Round.